Good afternoon and welcome to the first and only Park Hill South debate. I am your moderator, Jake Young. We've already introduced the candidates, so let's get right into the questions. Each other, be nice, and let's have fun. We will begin with opening statements first from Christian.
Hi, I'm Christian Holferty. I'm the president of the Young Republicans Club, and all I'd really like to say is America's the best. That's all I really have for you.
Okay. Next, an opening statement from Evan Morris.
Yes, hello. My name is Evan Morris, and I consider myself to be a libertarian. A few of the things that I believe in, I think that we should reduce the size of the government, and I think that our government should only exist to protect our liberty and our freedoms that have been set forth in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. However, I do believe that our freedom should make sense. I think that we should, mainly protect the environment, as that is a very big issue nowadays. And I think that we should protect ourselves from foreign enemies with our currently very, very large military. And I think that military is probably a little bit too large, and I think we should make it more efficient. I also think that we should demilitarize the police and end the drug war, because that has caused much pain and suffering in the families of the victims of that terrible war. And I think we should, instead of treating drug use as a crime, we should treat it as a medical condition. I have many more beliefs, but those were some of the most important ones.
Thank you, Evan. We'll now go to an opening statement from Chance Jeffers.
I'm Chance Jeffrey. I believe I can represent the Green Party more than most any party as of now. I really want to stress the amount of how much we need to save the environment, and due to its diminish that's currently happening now, with each passing day, it's becoming more and more evident that we need to save the world because it is dying, and we are its inhabitants, and we caused this. And I also believe we should legalize the recreational and medical use of marijuana, for it has more good than bad purposes in it.
Thank you, Chance. Our next opening statement will come from Sarah Comar.
My name is Sarah Comar, and I am proud to be standing here as the president of the Park Hill South Young Democrats. There are many reasons why I'm a Democrat. I care about women's health care, I care about criminal justice reform, I care about immigration reform, I care about solving the climate crisis and leaving a livable planet for our children and grandchildren. But I think that the most basic and yet most important reason that I identify as a member of this party is that the Democratic Party is one that each day operates based on the belief that every person is entitled to the same basic, inalienable rights, no matter the color of their skin, their gender, their sexual orientation, their religion or lack thereof, their ethnicity, their citizenship status, or their economic background. We in the Democratic Party believe that every person, by nature of being alive, is innately endowed with the same civil and human rights, even if a given country, politician, or administration tries to deny that they have these rights or tries to infringe upon them. And more importantly, we in the Democratic Party do not just recognize those rights, we actively work through our platform and our politicians to make sure that those rights are protected for all people living in this country, not just those of a certain race, faith, or country of origin. We are the party of making equal opportunities for all, not just advancing the status of a few already privileged people. We believe that it is not just a choice, but an absolute responsibility for the government that leads our nation to care for those in our society who need it most, be it children in our public schools, those in poverty who need assistance, sick people who need accessible health care to survive, or the elderly who rely on government-sponsored pensions, Medicare, and Social Security. We live every day with the mindset that America is at its best when lifting up all people, regardless of their previous advantages or disadvantages, so that they all may have a fair shot to succeed and truly live the American dream. We are the party of equality, the party of social and economic justice, and most importantly, the party of the future. And I am proud to stand here today and represent a few incredibly hardworking young men and women who are part of the next generation of voters and leadership.
Thank you, Sarah. Our next opening statement will come from Evan Means.
Hello, I'm Evan Means. I'm the leader of the Young Leftists, and I'd like to thank Jake and all of the broadcast people for putting this on. And to begin with my opening statement, it is only when you begin to compromise that trouble begins. So far as I am concerned, it does not matter what others may say or think or do, as long as I am sure that I am right with myself and the cause. There are so many who seek refuge in the popular side of a great question. As a socialist, I have long since learned how to stand alone. Well, for myself, I have never had much faith in leaders. I am willing to be charged with almost anything rather than be charged with being a leader. I am suspicious of leaders, and especially of the intellectual variety. Give me the rank and file every day of the week. If you go to the city of Washington and you examine the pages of the congressional directory, you'll find that almost all of those corporation lawyers and cowardly politicians, members of Congress, and misrepresentatives of the masses, you'll find that almost all of them claim, in glowing terms, that they have risen from the ranks to places of eminence and distinction. When I rise, it will be with the ranks and not from the ranks. Why should socialists be discouraged on the eve of the greatest triumph in all of history of the socialist movement? It is true that these are anxious, trying days for us all, testing days for the women and men who are upholding the banner of labor and the struggle of the working class, of all the world against the exploiters of all the world, a time in which the weak and cowardly will falter and fail and desert. They lack the fiber to endure the revolutionary test. They'll fall away, they'll disappear as if they had never been. On the other hand, they who are animated by the unconquerable spirit of the social revolution, they who have the moral courage to stand erect and assert their convictions, stand by them, fight for them, go to jail for them, go to hell for them, if need be. They are writing their names in this crucial hour. They are writing their names in the faceless letters in the history of mankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. Our first question. 8 days ago, the future of the United States was radically altered by the stunning election upset that placed Donald Trump into office as President of the United States. What do you believe was the single most significant factor in this unforeseen upset? Christian, we will start with you.
Well, I don't know why it was seen as such a surprise. Hillary was a weak candidate. She was marred with scandals, and even though Donald Trump was, and he shot himself in the foot time after time after time, sometimes it made me angry how stupid he was. But she was a weak candidate, and you saw something with Trump that you didn't see with Hillary. He filled arenas with people. He had high energy. He hit a note that no other politician really thought to, while everyone else in the Republican Party was trying to be more centered. He decided to go for the white, middle-class, blue-collar workers who were angry, and he did it better than anyone else could have. He branded himself. He used the media against itself. They were always trying to bring him down, when in reality he spent less money just by saying something outrageous, and people kept hearing Trump, 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 Trump. And did he lie? Quite a bit. I hate to say it, but it worked. We have the House, we have the Senate, we have the presidency, and now we'll also have the judiciary branch soon enough.
Thank you. We will now take a question to Evan Morris.
Yes, well, I think that the single biggest factor in the election of Donald Trump is the Electoral College, and I think that it is an institution that made sense when our founders created it, when the best way that you could communicate was to sit a guy on a horse and send him off and hope he didn't die somewhere along the way. But now that we have the internet and telephones and all of these wonderful pieces of technology that allow us to communicate at the speed of light, I think it's an outdated institution that should be abolished, because it's, as we have seen in this election and in 3 other elections in our history, we have had candidates which most of the population do not support get into office anyway because of the system. And I think that and if we can't completely abolish it, I think that the electors need to be required to vote for their candidate that their state picked for them, rather than choosing on their own accord, because I think that is an undemocratic system, and it could sway an election in a very, very bad way in the future.
Thank you, Evan. Now we will go to Chance Jeffrey.
I believe that the single most significant factor in this unforeseen upset of the election was the ability that Donald Trump had to tap into a sort of suppressed anger that most of the American people had, who were tired of having career politicians, corrupt individuals, and those lead our country for not in our favor, but in theirs, to gain fortune and wealth. And I believe that's really why, because he had a lot of people, but most people seemed to be ashamed to vote that to admit that they supported him. That's why the pollsters most likely got that wrong, which resulted in the huge upset because everyone believed that Hillary was going to win. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
I believe that the biggest factor in why Donald Trump won the presidency was because people underestimated just how truly disillusioned the lower middle class has become since the 2008 economic recession. When you have this group of a majority disillusioned people who have been suffering hardships because of economic downturn for the last 8 years, that's going to lead to two things. One, they are more susceptible to fall for demagoguery, and Donald Trump ran a textbook demagogue during this campaign. The campaign he ran was based on fear-mongering and hate-mongering against the other. And when people are disillusioned and they are hurting and they are in economic turmoil, they are far more likely to buy into a politician who scapegoats other people. Oh, it's not my fault. It's someone else's fault. It's not about me. It's the Muslims, or it's the liberal media, or whatever it may be. And two, when people are disillusioned, I agree with my opponent Chance that leads them to be more likely to want to just elect someone who they believe is going to overthrow the system, someone who is not really a traditional establishment member of either of two parties. And while I believe that the way people went about trying to accomplish those goals through voting for Donald Trump was incredibly ill-informed, I do understand that a big part of the reason people did it was because they saw him as an outsider. And when people have been living in such hard times for so long, they are far more likely to want to go for a quote-unquote outsider.
Thank you. Evan Means.
Yeah, it's been hit on a lot, but ultimately what it comes down to is crisis. In 2008, capitalism itself went into crisis with the recession and banking and all of that. And we see that not adequate steps were taken, like Sarah said, to ensure that the people got back on their feet. We bailed out the banks, we bailed out the corporate, we bailed out the capitalists. And ultimately, that now is the time to establish emergency response structures for racist state attacks, and plans for what to do if Trump actually does plan to round up Muslims and illegal immigrants. Now is the time to organize. And ultimately, focusing this discontent within the working class, the white working class, which Trump ultimately won, that is the key cornerstone for the left. Without a strong leftist movement to combat this growing trend of further right candidates, that we need to organize. And that's simply what it comes down to. And that we see that without the radical left, or even just the left in general, to combat Trump and other people like him, that we see him go uncontested in the change factor. What people want is change, and only the left can provide that real change that people want. And it ultimately comes down to, we need to take back, and all we have to do, or all we have to lose, is our change.
Thank you. And in a related follow-up question, in the days since, protests have broken out across the country. A petition has even been produced urging the Electoral College to disregard the vote and elect Hillary Clinton president. What do these events say about the state of the country, and what should be done to address them? Christian.
Well, first I would like to address Sarah saying that, it was, I don't know quite what she said, but basically what she was getting down to was that Trump fear-mongered people. He was blaming blacks, he was blaming Muslims, blaming Latinos. When the thing is, Trump had more votes from the black and Latino and Muslim community than any other Republican since Reagan. So I don't think that was, did he get a whole lot? No, but he did better than a lot of Republicans. But back to the protesters. What I'd tell them is, shut up. Trump won. There's nothing you can really do about it. This has been a system since we've started having elections. You need to stop whining and you need to come together as a people. If Hillary would have won, I would have been like, oh shucks, let's get back to business. I'm not going to protest in the street. I'm going to hope that whoever my president is, that they'll do well, because that will make America do well. That's all.
Thank you. Evan Morris.
Yes, well, I think that these protests are a normal thing. It's happened basically with every single election that we've had, going back quite a ways. I think it's something that's probably going to end rather quickly. It's been almost a week. I think it's been exactly a week since the election, and I think they're probably starting to wind down. But in regards to the Electoral College, I think that it's ridiculous that they would think that they would want the people who choose our president to disregard the people that they are meant to represent and choose someone totally different. They're not supposed to represent the interests of the entire nation as a whole. They're supposed to represent the states that they are elected to represent. And I think that they should honor what their states think. That's all.
Thank you. Chance?
I would say to the protesters to stop having a tantrum because that's all they really are. And through this tantrum, they've caused tremendous damage in money for the tax-paying people, which really is just, I don't know why they would, it's just costing them money and the people who didn't want this to happen. They're kind of just, I don't know, they're acting like 5-year-olds, really. I'm disappointed in the American people. It's the majority, a lot of people chose President Trump, and he is in office. Well, he's going to be in office. He's the president-elect. We can't really do much about it. We just need to say, well, we don't know if he's going to be good or bad yet. We'll find out soon. There's always impeachment, really, if he's that quite awful, which I hope he is not and pray. Currently, I just want to see how he does. And I don't know why they would be mad. He said some stupid things, but we don't really know how he can act politically. And we don't know if that's good or bad, if he's going to act good or bad at all. So we should just wait and see. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
In regards to these protests, I would say to those people who are being violent and vandalizing cars or burning the American flag or burning Donald Trump in effigy, absolutely I condemn that, and everyone should be condemning such actions. However, to the massive groups of people that are not being violent, that are simply peacefully protesting, they're exercising one of their fundamental constitutional rights to peaceful protest. And you know what? We can't condemn people for doing that, because that is part of what makes America so great, is the fact that we all have the right to do that. And moreover, I would say to be a true American, we have the responsibility to speak out when injustice is happening. When someone who's been elected who is a racist, sexist, xenophobic demagogue, it is okay to protest and to send a message out to the world, to our black and brown brothers and sisters, to our Muslim brothers and sisters, to our Hispanic brothers and sisters, to our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, that we are with them and we do not agree with this injustice and we care about them and we are going to stand and fight for them. That is what the message that these protests send. And that is absolutely their right, people's right as an American to do that. As Elie Wiesel, a Jewish Holocaust survivor, once said, there may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but we must never fail to protest it. To my opponents that say that these people are just being whiny, there were people calling for armed revolution if Trump did not win the election and Hillary won. So I do not think it's really fair for my opponent to say, oh, we would have just sucked it up and been okay with it if Hillary had won, when there were literally Trump supporters calling for an armed rebellion with taking up muskets. People should absolutely, if they're being peaceful, exercise their right to protest.
Thank you. Evan Means.
I'd like to begin to say, I'm not just having a temper tantrum. I'm not a 5-year-old, and I'm not going to shut up. I myself have participated in those protests. I myself have let my voice be heard, and that's what we need to do. That, like I said, we need to organize labor. We need to organize the middle and lower class. We seek to revitalize democracy itself. All the most marginal and oppressed peoples, the slum dwellers, the peoples of ghettos, the people left behind, we assert them as equals and to their natural superiors as active agents and equal access to reason. And what this is ultimately, what it comes down to is that every human is created equal, like Sarah said in her opening statement. And that Ultimately, we need to have our voice be heard. That this system can't go on forever. This system has internal problems that can't be solved and will only be solved by changing it outright. And ultimately, we see the contradictions within capitalism itself, and that must be stopped. That's ultimately what it comes down to. With every crisis such as 2008, the Great Depression, capitalism becomes leaner and meaner and exploiting the world. Capitalism becomes stronger in grasping international relations and even our home politics, that we don't see an election outside of bourgeois influence. And ultimately, that is what we seek to remove. That is what we seek to get rid of. We seek to assert the people's voice back into it, not the voice of capital or money itself. Thank you.
A series of police shootings of unarmed civilians over the course of the last several years has reignited a major racial debate in the United States. It has stretched far and wide and captivated the national conversation. What do you believe to be the root cause of this issue, and what can be done to work toward a solution?
Let me start this off by saying not all cops are bad cops. In fact, a majority of cops are good cops. We've just focused on the few bad apples, and the media has thrown it way out of proportion. We've just focused on them, none of the good cops. Blue lives matter. Hold on, let me look at the question again. I think the root cause of it is basically there's been a lot of racial unrest with groups as such like Black Lives Matter. I'm against Black Lives Matter. Do Black Lives Matter? Yes. So do Latino lives. So do Asian lives. So do white lives. Not just black lives. I think that we've just blamed cops for a lot of problems in America, and it needs to stop. We need to come together, support cops, and start talking about the real problems, which is just racial unrest that we've just kind of pushed to the corners, pushed to the side. Yeah, we just need to talk about it.
Thank you. Evan Morris.
Kind of lost
Well, I
track
think
there.
there are two main causes
Lost
to
track,
this
that
big
was
issue.
bad.
And I think the first cause, the more minor of the two, is the way that policing in North America has changed since the 1950s, when the image of the community cop, the person you could come up to and talk to, was prevalent. What it has become is cops using overwhelming intimidation to get these people to submit, and then trying to figure it out. But these people, instead of submitting, their fight or flight response kicks in. It's basic psychology. And they will either pull out a gun and try to shoot the cop, or they will run for it and the cop will chase after them. But either way, it's not a good result. And I think that the second main cause of it is the drug war. Since, just like in the Prohibition era, there were the rise of gangsters. They made their alcohol and they sold it, and if the police came in, they would either try to bribe off the police or there would be a big shootout.
I don't know what it is.
Either way, that's not good. And what we're seeing right now with this police brutality and all this violence is just like Prohibition, except this time it's with marijuana and cocaine and heroin, and it's with drug cartels instead of gangsters. So I think those are the two root causes.
It's kind of my fault I had a bad response.
Thank you. Chance.
I believe that the police have been over-militarized, meaning they're kind of been a gun surplus throwaway for the DoD. And then they've been trained with these weapons by private contractors who seem to give them the warrior-like sense, meaning that they believe that they are warriors and that they are better. And the people are just kind of too afraid of what's been happening. The police seem to be more aggressive than they once were. And the reason they feel this is because of the shootings that we've seen in the past times. And unlike my opponent said, I believe that the shootings by police that have happened have been blown under proportion. Because even though it's a few, they are still unjustified, but they seem to be getting less jail time than those who would still murder. Murder is murder. If you kill someone without reason, that is murder. Even if you are a cop, me, any of my fellow debaters, or anyone in this world, it is murder. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah.
Murder.
Well, first of all, I would just like to say that we can agree that most cops are good cops, while still recognizing that we have a problem with police brutality here in America, and that we should do something to address it. And I would say that the best way to well, first of all, I would say the root cause of this problem is that people do have inherent biases, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's not a thing that any of us can help. We are all conditioned to have inherent biases against people of other races, people who look different from us. It is just how human beings work. However, what we need to be doing is making sure that we implement a program that teaches police officers how to recognize their inherent biases and how to not let those interfere with their policing. I think we need to set up a multi-point plan that includes multiple steps that have been scientifically proven to cut down on the rate of excessive force use with police. One of the solutions would be to hire more women. It's been shown that when you hire more women into police departments, that women are less likely to use excessive force than men. Another good solution is requiring that police officers have a college degree. Again, police officers who have college degrees on average are far less likely to use excessive force than police officers who don't. So those would just be a few tenets of the multi-point plan. And I think another important point would be, as Chance said, to demilitarize the police. The police have become far too militarized. They literally have bring tanks to some protests. Like, a lot of decommissioned military equipment is given to police forces to use, and we should not be treating our police like soldiers. We want police to be people that ordinary citizens in the community can come to when they need help, not someone that they have become conditioned to fear because of the way police officers seem like soldiers. And to the Black Lives Matter movement, I just want to say I'm with you. Black Lives Matter. To the All Lives Matterers, I am sorry that we don't live in a country where that sentiment is yet true, but unfortunately we don't. And so you do not get to appropriate the Black Lives Matter movement.
Thank you. Evan Means.
I think a huge current that has been ignored in the discussion today is socioeconomic status. We see these crimes as a perpetual cycle of crime in low-income areas, and we have the hood, we have the ghetto, places where people are trapped due to their economic situation, and is perpetuated by the capitalist structure as a whole. The capitalist structure as a whole relies upon people to be downtrodden. Not everyone can be at the top of the pyramid. Not everyone can be millionaires. It's a simple fact, and that ultimately that the institution of police itself is used by the capitalist state. And that's what we must realize, that people can organize themselves, that people can handle themselves through communities and through other means other than having a state that does not represent their interests clamp down on them and enforce rules that are made by an unrepresentative electorate. Thank you.
In 2014, ISIS or ISIL declared themselves a world caliphate. They are now estimated to include anywhere between 30 and 100,000 militant members, and have only recently begun to lose the territory they once held. Secretary of State John Kerry has stated that the United States is definitely at war with ISIS. What measures should we take to combat the direct threat of ISIS?
Well, I think we've learned from the past, 13 years now, that fighting terrorists, and I guess you could bring this back to Vietnam too, fighting a unofficial war force, more of a guerrilla army, is pretty hard to do. And we need to figure out how to do it before we go back in there. Because personally, I'm a Republican. I didn't really support the war in Iraq. I think that it was all a way to get oil. I think that our generals were incompetent. They didn't really estimate the power of their forces, and I don't think we still really know the power of ISIS forces. I don't like using drones because drones have killed more civilians than really ISIS members. We just have to figure out a way to fight them before we really jump in. That's all.
Thank you. Evan Morris.
Yes, well, I think that what we're doing in the Middle East right now it's a good idea. I like the airstrikes supporting our Iraqi allies in fighting this terrorist group. They've committed many great atrocities, and they've taken the freedoms away from many inhabitants of the areas who don't support ISIS. And I think that that's an absolute travesty, but I don't think that we should risk American lives in trying to stop it, because this is a uniquely Middle Eastern problem. I do think that we should continue our airstrikes and help our Iraqi allies, as I've already said. But I also think that if they do get too powerful, then maybe we should put boots on the ground to try to stop this. Because if we don't try to stop them, then what we get is another 9/11, and that's obviously a very bad thing.
Can't
Thank
argue
you.
with that.
Chance.
I believe the first thing we should do to help combat ISIS is increase aid to the Syrian army and rebels who are fighting them currently on the ground, on the front lines. We should also increase vetting for those refugees who seek refuge in our country currently, instead of just stopping it all right. Due to the uncertainty of these refugees, we do not know if they are actually ISIS affiliates or those who wish to seek harm on our country. Thus the reason why we should increase vetting. We should also increase our military presence in Syria, but more on a humanitarian basis by helping those who have recently recaptured their city-states rebuild and hopefully defend them from counterattacks from ISIS to reclaim those, and possibly help increase security in those weak cities that are currently around. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah.
We have been involved in the war against ISIS since 2014. We have been carrying out airstrikes and putting a limited number of special forces on the ground in Iraq, Syria, and the Levant. And I would say we should continue what we are doing, but not expand, because we have seen with the past, just like Christian said, with the past 15 years, that more American interventionism usually breeds more terrorism, not less. So we don't want to be getting more interventionist. However, our allies in Iraq, the Iraqi forces and the Kurdish forces that are currently fighting and that we are providing some funding and aid to, they are winning the war, slowly but surely. They have been taking back territory that ISIS conquered. So clearly what we're doing, what is happening now is working, so we should continue the support that we are currently giving these forces. We should continue our airstrikes. We should enforce a no-fly zone over Syria to make the war effort to enable the war effort to be more successful. However, we shouldn't become more interventionist. And the only thing that we should expand would be humanitarian aid, just like my opponent Chance said, to those people who are suffering under ISIS's threat and who are trying to rebuild their cities after their cities are taken back from ISIS.
Thank you. Evan Means.
Ultimately, what it comes down to, the solution has been right in front of our eyes for a long time. Right now, Kurdistan is the biggest fighter against ISIS, not the Syrian government, not the rebels. Currently, they are the ones that are on the front lines. The Kurdistani forces are the ones fighting on the ground. But we conveniently ignore them because they adhere to socialist ideals. They're labeled as a terrorist organization by America and other international organizations, and that's simply the problem. We seem to not have a problem funding terrorists that support our objectives, but as soon as they differ from the political narrative, that's when we cut off funding. That's when we cut off aid to these people struggling. Also, a no-fly zone in Syria in the current day would be disastrous. It would cause a war with Russia, because Russia will not cease their airstrikes. Russia will not back down with their ally in Syria. And ultimately, what it comes down to is that that we need to support people that are local to the region. We do not need intervention. We do not need more imperialism. We do not need more. We do not need more than what we're already doing. It's plain and simple.
Despite being legally addressed 43 years ago in the Roe v. Wade court case, abortion continues to be a subject of debate across the country. Proponents on each side of the issue view it as an issue of basic rights. Do you support a total ban, a constitutional provision, or a policy somewhere in between? We will begin with Christian.
This has always been a hard issue and an issue that I've flip-flopped on for years now. I'm not a woman, so I can't really say what I'd do in that situation. But I don't like the thought of government being able to tell you what you can do with your body. But I also don't like the thought of a child dying. So I've kind of tried to meet in the middle. I think if you were raped or if having a child could bring harm to you, then yes, you can abort it. But other than that, I'm not really for it. Especially not what Hillary thinks with the whole, what is it, 36 weeks? I can't remember what her limit is, but I think if you're going to abort a child, it has to be early. But even then, I'm still not kind of sure about it.
Thank you. Evan Morris.
Yes, well, I believe that we should try to preserve the freedoms of both the child and the woman in this case. I think that a woman should have a right to control what happens to her own body, and she should have bodily autonomy. She should have access to abortions up until the child can live outside of the womb. Once the child can live outside the womb, I think we should consider it its own person, and it should be entitled to be able to live and carry out its life. And this is, of course, what went through in the Roe v. Wade decision, and I think we should continue enforcing that.
Thank you. Chance.
The United States was built on an inalienable right to choose. This right has changed throughout the life of America controversially. Whether it was religion, freedom to choose your own religion without persecution, the right to choose to speak freely, or the right to choose to be searched by the police without a warrant on your own accords. And the right to choose for a woman to have an abortion is now the most controversial at the moment. Now, most argue that abortion would be murdering an innocent. While morally it is not the best for an abortion to happen, but in this day and age, most people will think more of the rights that they have than morally, I believe. Meaning that most people would want to choose what they do to themselves or with someone else. And the government should not have a say whether they shouldn't do this or they should. Even if they should be able to have an abortion whether or not they want to or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah.
Well, the Roe versus Wade decision is the law of the land now. A woman's right to an abortion is constitutionally protected. That's how the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, ruled. So to try to restrict it would be to defy the highest court in our land. Furthermore, the thing about abortions is that outlawing abortions doesn't lead to less abortions, it just leads to less safe abortions. When you outlaw abortions, people who are desperate are still going to seek after them. However, they're going to seek out illegal abortions that are not only going to end the life of that fetus, but are also going to threaten the life of the mother in many cases. But prior to the Roe versus Wade decision, about 5,000 women across the country died just in the year right before the decision by failed back alley illegal abortions. That's why we have to keep it safe and legal for a woman to get an abortion. The only sort of restriction that I would support on this would be a prohibition of partial birth abortions, except in the cases of a life-threatening condition to the mother, rape or incest, and a restriction on late-term abortions, again, to only the cases of the life of the mother, or if the child is going to be born with a birth defect so severe that it will die anyway, or if the woman was raped, or the baby was a product of incest. So we have to make sure that we're keeping abortion safe, and that means keeping it legal, because we don't want, if people want to argue about being pro-life, or what about the lives of mothers that would be lost if abortions became illegal again?
Thank you. Evan Means.
I may be morally against it, but I do not see the point in forcing a ban or even just an uplifting of all regulations. So what ultimately I support is that the people and the parents of this child choose. It's about pragmatics, and that can be about morals, that can be about whatever criteria you decide to assess on your own personal basis to be. And then that's your decision. It's your body, your choice. And while you may be supporting an infant, but you may be able to not support that infant with regards to socioeconomic status, with regard to other situations, as Sarah mentioned, and that ultimately that I support the person's choice to choose what they do with their body. Thank you.
Following the political rise of Donald Trump, border control and immigration issues have returned to the forefront of the national conversation. Opinions vary on the issue, ranging from mass deportations to total amnesty. How would you structure our border policy, and what would you do in regard to the over 11 million undocumented immigrants currently living in our borders? We will begin with Christian.
Well, first off, would I like the idea of building a wall? Yes. But being a conservative, it's too expensive for me. I don't like that idea, economically. When people say that Trump is going to deport all of the illegal aliens. Would I like that idea also? Yes, but it's just not realistic. If you think you're going to be able to round up 11 million people and ship them back to their home country, then you're just stupid. That's impossible. I don't want to grant illegal aliens total amnesty. I don't think you should be rewarded for committing a crime. I think we should. I think if you're caught, you're sent back. If you decide to apply for citizenship, then great, you're a citizen. Good job. Should have done it earlier. I just think this is a pretty hard thing to talk about because I guess just strengthen the Border Patrol. That would be the best option for stopping illegal immigration.
Thank you. Evan Morris.
Yes, well, Donald Trump's building the wall, it makes absolutely no sense. You know, if you make a 30-foot wall, you're just going to make a market for 31-foot ladders, which is why I've put my money in the Mexican ladder market. But anyway, I think that the 11 million illegal immigrants that are currently here should be allowed to stay. However, and I think the path to citizenship needs to be made much more streamlined and much easier for them. And I think we need to be able to keep our eyes on them to make sure that they're not doing anything really sketchy. You know, if you're sitting in your house one day reading the newspaper and all of a sudden this guy barges in with like 10 of your friends, you're not going to be very happy about it. So I think we need to kind of treat it like a situation like that where, you know, we just have all these people here and we need to figure out something to do with them. And I think what we should do with them is help them to become citizens of the U.S.
Thank you. Chance.
I believe that we need to change the immigration policy that we have because currently it makes becoming American citizen extremely difficult. If we do reform immigration, it would increase the amount of illegal immigrants that we have and influx and the amount of immigrants that we have coming in that are illegal. And we also, and I do agree with Christian on how we should increase border security because then that promotes immigrants who wish to become American citizens to properly do it through the correct channels, meaning they actually apply for visas or a green card and then attempt to get full citizenship when they are in America. Thank you.
Sarah.
I actually agree with most of my opponents here today. For one thing, I believe that it's important that we change our immigration policy to make it easier for someone applying for citizenship to become a citizen and make it into this country. Secondly, I think we should strengthen security along the border, not building the wall, because obviously that is incredibly economically infeasible. And again, we already have a wall. If the wall gets taller or whatever, we'll have a wall/fence. If the wall gets taller, so are the ladders, just like my opponent said. So it's not really a valid solution. So putting more money into the actual Customs and Border Patrol officers would be a better choice. Also, as far as undocumented immigrants that are already in the country, if they've been living here for years and they've created a life and they've had children here, we should absolutely look at how important it is for us to create a path to citizenship for those people. Because even undocumented immigrants contribute massively to our economy. In last year alone, it is estimated that undocumented immigrants contributed $17.8 billion to state and local taxes. These immigrants are a huge boon to our economy, even if they're coming in undocumented, and therefore, rather than spending a lot of money to round up these people and deport them, we should be making it easier for them to actually participate in our civic process, become a citizen, and be able to benefit our economy even more.
Thank you. Evan Means.
No human is illegal. That is my basis for this entire debate. No human should be turned away from seeking a better life. I believe in the free movement of labor, the free movement of people. If we look back in history into the Cold War era, we see that the countries where these people are coming from, Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, are all countries that the U.S., an imperial power, intervened in. With Guatemala now being the most violent nation on the earth, we cannot turn these people back. Their lives are in danger, and they're coming here to seek a better life. And that ultimately, in ideals, I believe in no border at all. I don't believe in no borders. I don't believe in nations. I believe that the working man should unite across borders.
How'd that
And
work out for France?
But in a more realistic option, that the U.S. should re-adopt the Ellis Island style of system. The U.S. experience on Ellis Island at the turn of the 20th century is instructive. The island proceeded processed an astonishing 1.25 million immigrants in 1907, a banner year for U.S. immigration. In the next decade, U.S. immigration authorities also mastered immigrant processing, including ultra-efficient medical checks and questioning aboard ships. That we should not turn away people who are seeking to come here. And then ultimately, when having more people, a more diverse society, and having people seek a better life, that is what is based upon an inclusive society. That is what we seek to revitalize democracy. Take those who are downtrodden, take those who are ignored in their current society, and include them into ours. Integrate, and ultimately that no human being is illegal. And I stand by that as one of my guiding principles. Thank you.
In the current state of the country, mass shootings and attacks on civilians have become almost commonplace. Prominent voices on the left have argued for increased regulations on guns and the transactions relating to them. This has been met with attacks by the right, arguing that enhanced gun control violates the Second Amendment. Do you support the drive for increased gun control, and if so, what measures should be taken?
Well, first off, I'd like to just go back to Evan and talk about the border for just a second. Having no border, how'd that work out for France and multiple other European countries that have had terrorist attacks? Now to the gun issue. I think you should be allowed to have guns. I don't think you should really be allowed to have an automatic weapon without a specific license. I don't think that anyone should be able to buy a gun. I think that you should also have a license. I don't think if you have a criminal record that you should be able to buy a gun. I don't think we should take away guns because, one, you saw in, I think it was South Carolina, there was a shooter at a club and then a registered gun owner stopped him. Gun owners aren't bad people. A majority of them are good people. Over 1/3 of Americans own a gun. If we were really a problem, you'd know it. I think we should make it a tad bit harder to get a gun, but don't take away guns. I know that wasn't really the question, but so many people are saying it. That's just stupid.
Thank you. Evan Morris.
Yes, well, I think that guns they're a good thing. They let people be able to provide defense for themselves. You know, you're never going to be able to 100% cut off the gun supply. Even in nations that have totally banned guns, there's still going to be criminals who keep a gun with them. And if criminals have guns, then we should make it so that citizens can get guns so that they can defend themselves from the criminals when the police aren't around. However, I don't think it makes very much sense to just let anyone go out to Cabela's one day and just, pick up a military grade style, whatever, machine gun without any checks whatsoever. Whatever, yep, you're good, just take your gun. I think our background check system right now is working just fine, and I think people who are suspected to be planning an attack should not be allowed to buy a gun, because that makes no sense whatsoever. If you know this person is going to go and shoot up someplace, you're not just going to be like, oh, yeah, here, take this gun, go do it. It doesn't make any sense at all. So that's my personal opinion on the thing.
Thank you. Chance?
I believe that we don't need to take away guns, as Christian said, but the question isn't really about taking away guns. It's more, we need to increase our gun control. Not drastically like making it so you have to wait 6 months before you can own a weapon, a waiting period. More like we should have psychological evaluations and background checks. Because if you can't pass a psychological evaluation, I don't think you should be allowed to carry a gun on your own free will. And when the when the great men who wrote the first 10 amendments, they thought of us, the right to bear arms. The weapons that they had were muskets, and they had no idea that we would have the weapons that we have today. They had little guns that could fire one ball at a time, and it would take a minute or less to reload at a time. Now we have weapons that can shoot hundreds of bullets a second without stopping. Thus why we kind of need to stricken what the gun control is. Because people say that you're taking away our rights. Well, the people who gave us those rights did not think that we would have the weapons that we have today. Thank you.
Sarah?
Yeah, all my opponents seem to be relatively in agreement on this issue, and I also have to reiterate what they said. Of course, we should not take away all guns or prevent people from ever buying guns, because for one thing, that wouldn't work, and for another thing, that would be an infringement on our Second Amendment rights, which is an important part of the Bill of Rights. However, when we talk about gun control has a very negative connotation, but if we're going to call it gun control, then the measures that I would support would be universal background checks, which the majority of the population, both Democrats and Republicans, have said they support. Universal background checks is just common sense. I agree with Chance in saying that they should include a certain kind of psychological profile, and if you're unstable in a violent manner, that person shouldn't be sold a gun. Furthermore, if we could look at how first of all, reforming the no-fly list so that people aren't put on it as unjustly as they are now. If we could find a way to reform that no-fly list, then perhaps institute a no-fly, no-buy policy. You can't buy a gun if you're currently on the no-fly terrorist watch list. Common sense measures like that to help prevent some of this senseless violence. And as far as restrictions on the purchasing of weapons go, of course, people shouldn't have, the everyday American citizen shouldn't have access to automatic weapons or semi-automatic weapons. Like if it's a machine gun that my father, who's a general in the Army, could carry with him and shoot on the front lines, an everyday citizen shouldn't be allowed to get their hands on it. And that's something even most soldiers would agree on, that I know at least. And also, I agree with the fact, with what my opponent, Christian, said that, so I say universal background checks, common sense gun measures. That's all.
Thank you. Evan Means?
Yes, so ultimately, I'm surprised I'm the one differing on this, but, that the workers must be armed and organized. The whole proletariat must be armed at once with musket, rifles, and cannons and ammunitions. The revival of the old-style citizens' militia directed against the workers must be opposed. Where the formation of this militia cannot be prevented, the workers must try to organize themselves independently as a proletariat guard, with effective leaders and their own elected general staff. They must place themselves not under the orders of state authority, but of the revolutionary local councils set up by the workers. Where the workers are employed by the state, they must arm and organize themselves into a special corps with elected leaders or as part of a proletarian guard. Under no pretext should arms and ammunition be surrendered. Any attempt to disarm the workers must be frustrated. And that quote comes from Karl Marx himself. So, and that's what I believe in, that the workers should be armed. That even as John Locke, the grandfather of our nation, said, that we have a right to revolution. And that ultimately, without guns, we cannot perform a revolution. And when society becomes so distressed that we have elements that infiltrate our society, whether that be fascism, whether that be theocracy, whether that be a monarchy, we need to fight against that. And without that, we can't fight against it. And that, that this is what it comes down to for me. And that to tie in what Christian said in the beginning of the statement on mine, that we currently face terrorist attacks in our nation. We have a border. The border is not a realistic way to solve terrorist attacks. What is to solve is the underlying conditions that cause terrorist attacks, and that is disillusionment. That is the capitalist system itself. And ultimately, that's what we need to solve. And that while I'm not a fan of the founders, that when they created the Second Amendment, they had revolution in mind. They themselves revolted from the British government using arms, and that is what they intended to have for our populace.
Thank you. Within recent years, the world has witnessed the resurgence of Russia as an international superpower. To what degree do you believe Russia to be a threat to the United States, and what would you do to reduce this threat? We will begin with Christian.
Russia is a threat. Russia is a military power. But the thing is, let's just be friends. You know, I don't really understand what are they really doing that's harming us. They aren't North Korea. They aren't. I wouldn't even really want to fight China. I don't have a problem with China, unlike Donald Trump. Yeah, let's just be friends. I don't really see a need to fight them. I don't really see a need to, poke a bear with a stick. Don't really see a need for people to die. Just hash it out, which I think Trump's going to do, because Trump and Putin seem to be pretty good buddies. Not too worried.
Thank you. Evan Morris.
Well, I have to
Putin,
agree
I
with
don't care.
Christian on this one. I think Russia is still definitely a rival of ours on the global stage, but I think a Cold War-style nuclear arms race is a very bad idea, because if anything goes wrong anywhere along the line, we're basically going to see the entire human race go extinct, and that's something that I think we can all agree is bad. So I think we should try to be friends with Russia rather than trying to continue our rivalry with them. I think we should try to make up our differences and just live and let live.
Thank you. Chance?
Well, I believe Americans and Russians should try to find a peaceful ground with each other, because currently we are the number one. America is the number one nuclear and military power, but Russia is coming up close behind us, meaning we should really make them a great ally. And also, Russia just backed out of a deal recently due to recent events that kind of a safety deal that caused them to reduce 34 tons of plutonium that they had in their possession. Since they backed out of it, I think that's increased their nuclear power status slightly, which kind of prompts us to believe that we should be friends. And I can assume to say that most of us think we should be friends with Russia, to not poke a bear with a stick, as Christian said. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
I absolutely believe that Russia poses a threat to our society and to Western society in general. They frequently express anti-Western sentiment. They distribute that throughout the state-run news organizations and to every member of the population. Russia absolutely poses a threat, particularly because it is a major nuclear power. And I have to disagree with my opponents here and say that to be an ally with Russia would be to condone what they do on a regular basis. And Russia is not a democracy. Russia is an authoritarian dictatorship. Putin is not a president. He's a dictator. They regularly violate human rights. They throw LGBTQ folks in jail if they try to host a pride rally. They censor free speech. They censor any sort of speaking out against the government. And they have state-run news media so that there isn't even freedom of the press. To become best buddies with Russia, as everyone here is saying to do, would be to say that that is all right, that we as a country are okay with a non-democratic authoritarian regime persecuting its citizens, as long as we can get oil and trade from them and trade with them. So I think what we should do instead to reduce the threat, of course, not enter into armed conflict. That would be suicidal. But we should make them weaker, economically weaker, less able to make themselves stronger by imposing sanctions on Russia and by finding alternative sources to buy major goods that we get from Russia, such as oil from. And that comes down to investing in renewable energy so that we are not so oil dependent. Because we have to, along with our fellow NATO coalition states and the UN, impose economic sanctions on Russia so that we are sending a clear message that we don't condone what you do to your citizens.
Thank you. Evan Means.
Yes, both the U.S. and Russia have aims at becoming the number one power in the world. We aim to keep the status quo right now, and Russia contends to upset that order. And that creates an uncalculable power struggle. We saw that in the Cold War. The Soviet Union and the U.S. both tried to be number one. And ultimately, that's what leads to conflict. China also seeks into this contest. Right now, China and Russia are becoming closer friends. And that both these nations are imperialistic in nature. China with its exploits in Tibet, in Xinjiang, and even the Uyghurs. And then in Russia, we see the annexation of Crimea, the ruthless bombing of Syria, and even more across the world. That both these powers seek to become number one, and that is what breeds conflict. And we can't just reduce this conflict by saying, okay, let's be friends. Russia is an oligarchy, like Sarah said, and that it must be all three of our imperialistic nations must be opposed by worker struggles. That's what we seek. We seek internationalist cooperation, that the working man has no nationality, the working man has no nation, that he is a worker and a worker only. And that is what I seek to see in the world.
Thank you. Perhaps the most lasting impact of Barack Obama's presidency is the passing of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. President-elect Donald Trump intends to do away with some, but not all, of the act. Do you support this piece of legislation, and if so, to what degree? Christian?
I don't support Obamacare. I don't support socialized medicine at all, actually. Look at Canada. No one wants to be a doctor in Canada because no one makes money being a doctor in Canada. The thing with socialized medicine is, yes, you make it easier for everyone to be able to go see a doctor, and that's great. I think that's very valiant. But the thing is, by making it easier to get health care, the more and more people abuse that right, and then it ends up making the people who actually need the health care unable to get it. My uncle is a doctor, my aunt is a nurse, my sister is a nurse. And they all say that what ends up happening is people who don't need health, who don't need immediate attention, seek immediate attention. And then it keeps people who have had a heart attack, who have been shot, from getting what they need. I don't support Obamacare. Thank you.
Well, the whole healthcare thing, it's a very complicated issue, and it's a very complicated system in general. I think the Obamacare website was some millions and millions of lines of code long. But I don't support Obamacare. I don't think we should have a health system that's run by the government. I think we need to promote competition. We need to have a privatized healthcare marketplace where healthcare providers and insurance coverage people can have their policies compete and have capitalism go on, have the best win out and get the prize, and those who aren't so good, they're not going to do so well. That's generally what I think. Capitalism.
Thank you. Chance?
Well, I believe that Obama had a really good idea to try to give everyone health care. And I liked what he was doing up until it actually happened, because in the process of that, he caused the middle class he put a ginormous strain on the middle class, who make up most of the population of America. Meaning that we pay for more than that we pay for most of Obamacare, while the upper class, the 1% upper class, does not. So the middle class is mainly made up of working men, and we just want to work to get through the day and get home and have a nice night. And when they have to pay more taxes, that makes it harder, because then we have to work harder to try to keep that process going. While it is good that the lower class has affordable health care, while some did not, some do abuse, as my opponents have said, that right that they have been given. I believe that we should reform Obamacare, making the tax more equal among the population.
Thank you. Sarah?
Well, first of all, my policy on healthcare is that healthcare is and should be a human right, a basic, inalienable human right. Every human should have the right to not have to die from a disease that is preventable, to not have to die from a condition that they could have been saved from had they had access to healthcare. Affordable and available healthcare should absolutely be recognized as a human right, and it is being pushed to be recognized as such by the UN Council of Human Rights. So because I believe this, I think that there are certain aspects of Obamacare that are good. However, the way it was implemented was just inconsistent, and it was not the right structure. So the really good things about Obamacare is that now we have millions more people who are uninsured having health insurance for the first time ever. People also can't be denied coverage based on a pre-existing condition. People are not now forced to either sell their house to afford health care for their child with cancer, or just let their child die. That's the great thing, is that people can't be denied health care based on pre-existing conditions. However, what would be much more efficient and much more successful than Obamacare would be a single-payer system, a single-payer universal health care system. And I think that's what we should be moving towards. Because some of the biggest flaws in Obamacare have been because of the competition, because different healthcare markets in different states and different companies are allowed to compete. And because of that, they can hike up premiums as much as they want, especially within a state's border where you're not allowed to get where you have to get coverage within that state, and they can just, the major insurance companies can just dictate how high the premiums go. Therefore, if it was more organized under a single payer system, we would not only eliminate waste, but we would also be able to have a system that more people could afford, because it would be better regulated.
Thank you. Evan Means.
Yeah, I agree with what Sarah said. Healthcare is a human right. Someone should not be forced to die because they can't pay for it. Now, that's where I have my problem. People should not profit from other people's issues. That people should not make money from disaster. For the same reason I do not support people making money off of war. Death should be death and not a moneymaker. That we need to that is one of my major issues with capitalism itself. Making money, the profit motive on someone else's issues, is what drives these inefficiencies, is what drives the slum dwellers, the people in Africa, to not get health care. That is too expensive, out of their reach. Even people in America who have pre-existing conditions, like Sarah said, are forced to sell their houses to treat their diseases. That should not be the situation. We should not just sit down and say, okay, if that's the case in capitalism, let's just accept it. No, we need to change the system. We need a new system. That is what we need. We should take the flaws of this system and fix it. And that's the problem here. That's what we need to fix. We need to get rid of what is excess. We need to get rid of what is not good and take what is good and move on with society. We should not ground our heels into the ground to prevent progress for what we are doing as a species as a whole. And that's where I lie in this issue. That this system is decaying and long overdue for a change of heart. And thank you.
Thank you. It's 3:30. You want one more question? Or you want to go ahead and closing statements?
I think we should do some more.
What would be the next
Let's
question?
do more questions.
One more question and then closing statements?
Well, what's
Y'all
the
wanna talk
what's
about
the
weed?
question? What's the
Yes.
Let's talk about weed.
Let's talk about weed. Yes. One last.
Wait,
yes,
can we
weed
talk about
question and
North
then
Korea?
closing statements. No, one more
We're
question
doing
then closing
weed.
statement.
I want to talk about Korea.
Well, we're not doing weed, but we're going to talk about doing weed in our next question.
Let's do weed.
Let's do weed.
Brexit.
Weed. I feel like we're all going to agree on this.
What about the voice of the people?
Several states, including Colorado, California, and others, have legalized the recreational use of marijuana within their jurisdiction. Do you agree with the movement to decriminalize the use of this drug, and can these states pass these laws in spite of federal law that directly conflicts? We will begin with Christian.
Yes, I support the legalization of weed. I really don't think it's worth it to have someone go to prison over something like weed. That's just ridiculous. Plus, it gives the government something more to tax. It means more money for the government. I just don't think it's that big of a deal. I think weed, out of all the drugs we could legalize, is the best one we could. It's better for you than cigarettes or alcohol. Why not?
Thank you. Evan Morris?
Well, mainly I support the ending of the drug war, which has caused a lot of pain to a lot of people, and I don't think it makes very much sense. And so therefore I think legalization of marijuana is a good idea. But I don't just think we should stop at marijuana. I think we should decriminalize and legalize all drugs, and instead of treating it as a criminal offense, we should treat drug use as a medical condition, because that's what it is. I think methadone clinics and needle exchanges are a good idea because it prevents, in the case of needle exchanges, it prevents the spread of entirely preventable diseases. And in methadone clinics, we can wean people off of their addictions to these. They're pretty terrible substances, heroin and methamphetamine in particular. But I don't think the government should be able to tell people what they can and cannot do with their bodies, which is why I think we should legalize all drugs.
Thank you.
So,
Chance?
interesting.
I believe that we should legalize marijuana because it does more good than bad. It would actually than anything else. For medical reasons and personal reasons that are considered, like, for reasons that are not considered medical, like anxiety, there's not very many good things for that. It is very good for relieving epilepsy, pain, anxiety, depression, asthma, dependency and withdrawals, movement disorders, psychiatric symptoms, and countless others symptoms that people face in health. Well, I mean, it really does more good than bad, in all honesty. If we look, cigarettes kill countless people, and they're legal. Alcohol's legal, and many people get addicted to that more than they do marijuana. Same with cigarettes. I really see no reason why we shouldn't. It also makes the getting of marijuana safer and easier, because there's been shootings due to drugs, mainly marijuana, that can reduce due to local distilleries that people open up with when the marijuana is legalized. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, I again have to agree with my opponents. I think the question shouldn't be, can these states pass laws in spite of federal law that conflicts? Because obviously they can, they have, now there's precedent, they're doing it. The question should be whether it should be federally illegal at all, and it should not be. Marijuana should not be classified as a Schedule I drug right alongside heroin and cocaine. That is absolutely ridiculous. All the research has shown that it was simply hysteria to categorize marijuana that way and to make it illegal, because marijuana not only does not do very much harm, but it can have massive benefits. Marijuana is safer for you than smoking cigarettes. It has not been linked to lung cancer and mouth cancer the way cigarettes have. It is arguably safer than alcohol, or at least on the same level. Of course, there should be laws that you can't drive drunk just like you can't drive high, but marijuana is no more or less safe than even alcohol, and alcohol is legalized and again taxed, and the government could profit off of, or the government could help reduce its debt by taxing marijuana if it became federally legal. Moreover, marijuana is not just something that's fun for some people to do recreationally. It has legitimate medical uses that are currently in many states, except those who have passed laws differently, illegal for people to access. Medical marijuana can help people with intense medical situations that are debilitating, such as AIDS, glaucoma, and cancer, and the effects of radiation treatments for cancer. But they can also help more everyday illnesses, not just in reducing the pain, but in preventing them. The University of Chicago recently published a study that found that not only is marijuana helpful in the treatment of migraine pain, but smoking it in the long term can help reduce the frequency of your migraines and how severe they are. So we should absolutely allow access to this drug that has so many benefits for so many people.
Thank you. Evan Means.
From what I've heard, they've hit on all the points, and I do believe that we should, like Evan said, legalize all drugs treated as a medical condition, like the Portuguese did a while back. That they have seen success in reducing drug usage, deaths from overdose, and they've derived more revenue from it overall, as from taxation and such. And that's the essence of the problem, and I think we're on track to solve this problem the correct way. Seeing current opinions and the way things are going. Thank you.
We will now begin our closing statements, beginning with Christian.
Well, I'm glad that we did this today. I think we found, although we like to argue and we like to stand by our political party, I think we found today that we have a lot more in common than we tend to admit. And I think it's good that we, as teenagers, are talking about these issues now, and that we're well-versed in politics, so later on, 20 years down the road, we can start helping America ourselves, start helping our kids, start helping our parents, start helping our generation as well, to make America the best that it can be.
Thank you. Evan Morris.
Well, coming out of this debate, I'd just like to say I'm actually kind of surprised how unified we are on some of these issues. Obviously, not all of them. But a fist fight didn't break out, and it was better than what I was expecting, so that's good. I thought this debate went well, and I'm very glad that we had it. And I'd like to thank Mr. Henry for planting the original thought in our minds to hold such a debate.
Thank you. Chance?
I'd like to also agree with what's been said so far and how kind of surprising it is that we all agree on this much amount of stuff. And I think it's really great that us as teenagers are able to form our own opinions, even if they are not what our families believe in. Like, personally, both of my grandparents on my mother and father's side are hardcore conservative Republicans, and I am quite not. So I'm glad that we are able to form an opinion, some based on what we've grown up to learn with, some just based on what we've seen throughout life so far on our own. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
So I'd just like to say first, thank you to you for hosting this, and thank you to all my opponents for being here. And again, I'd like to echo what my opponent said, that I'm so impressed and honestly a little moved after this debate, seeing how many things we are united on, how many things we agree on, how there is more that unites us than there is that divides us. And that needs to be the message that we are sending out today in today's political climate. We are the future of politics. We are the next generation of leadership and of voters. We need to send a message to a world that seems more, a world and a country that seems more divided than ever, that there are more things we have in common than there are things that we have different. And I think that's one of the reasons that I identify as a Democrat, is because I really appreciate the message of unity, the message of uniting all everyday working class Americans under a populist message, regardless of race, ethnicity, economic history, social status, country of origin, religion, whatever it may be. We need to be sending the message to the world that the next generation of leadership, the future of this country, believes that we're stronger together than we are apart. Thank you.
Evan Means.
Again, I'd like to echo the sentiment. Thank you, Jake, for hosting this. Thank you, crew, for filming and editing this later and all the work that goes into that. But I'd like to conclude this debate with some analysis. That exit polls in the election last week showed that 61% of voters had an unfavorable view of Trump, and he obviously won the election. That shows that our system does not represent the people's wishes. We have an infinite choices of shampoo, of French fries, of hamburgers, and other worthless products, essentially. But we can only pick the two. We only have two political candidates. That is not what represents our people. What we need is someone who actually represents us. We need people to take action into their own hands and not leave it to the fat cats in Washington and Wall Street to solve it for them. To vote into, and that ultimately what is needed to be done is building a new mass party of the 99%, the downtrodden, like I've talked about through this entire debate. That it is shown by Bernie Sanders that the people can get mobilized via a socialist message. That there is discontent with our current economic system, and that millennials are increasingly having a favorable opinion of socialism. And that despite what you may know or what you've heard before, I encourage you just to read. Read what you can find. Read the Communist Manifesto. Read any article you can find online regarding socialism. Read Lenin, read Trotsky, anyone you can find, anyone you can get your hands on. It doesn't hurt to read opposing opinions, even if you don't agree with them. And that's where it comes from. Having an educated populace will lead to a better society overall. That we shouldn't shun certain opinions just because they're fringe or radical, rather that we should attack them head on in their core of their ideals. And that I stand in solidarity to say that no border walls, no deportation, tax billionaires like Trump, fund healthcare for all, make college free, Black Lives Matter, stand up to Trump's misogyny, defend women's rights, and stop the things like Dakota Access Pipelines and green jobs now.
And as the moderator, I'd like to thank all of you for making my job way easier than it should have been. And on a personal standpoint, I'd just like to say that if these are the people leading our country into its next generation, we are in good hands. Thank you very much, and good night.